So this is Talk with Toni. I want to welcome all of you. We have been joined today by Commissioner Scott Britton and Commissioner Kevin Morrison, both of whom are sponsors of the Residential Tenant Landlord Ordinance. I'm going to give each of them a moment to introduce themselves, and then let's talk about the ordinance. We'll start with Britton, which comes before Morrison. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam President. So I am Scott Britton. I'm the commissioner from the 14th District, which is the north and northwest suburbs of Chicago. With my friend and ally, Kevin Morrison, we put together this landlord tenant ordinance to basically give the same rights and responsibilities for landlords that exist in the city of Chicago to those in suburban Cook County. And I want to thank you, Madam President, for your strong support and getting this through. It was a long process, but we got it done. My
pleasure. Commissioner Morrison.
Hello, and thank you for having us today. I'm Kevin Morrison. I represent the 15th District in the northwest suburbs of Cook County. From my earliest days as a county commissioner, volunteering and participating in a point in time count, it is so critical that the county works to ensure that individuals are able to maintain stabilized housing. And so it was an honor to work with Commissioner Britton in seeing the RTLO pass.
Thank you. All right, let's talk about the particulars, Commissioner Britton. What's in the ordinance and what prompted your interest in securing this legislation?
It's interesting. A lot of people ask me if this came out of the COVID-19 pandemic. It actually did not. It happened before that, because I was contacted by a group of individuals who live in a very large housing complex in unincorporated Cook County. And they indicated they had huge problems with their landlord. And I said to them, well, you just should use your landlord tenant ordinance in the suburban area to protect yourselves. And I then found out they didn't have one. And so again, since we've had one in the city of Chicago since 1986, I started looking into this. I then talked to the advocate groups you'll hear from later, and I realized that there was a significant need. I also felt like, since I've been on the board for the last 2 years, the concept of equity and justice has been a huge part of you, Madam President, and your attempts to make changes in the county. I thought this was completely in line with trying to help those Black and brown communities, single mothers, people on the lower end of the economic scale. They were being very badly treated by a number of landlords. A lot of great landlords, most of whom do a great job, but some bad apples. And because of that, we were able to put together this ordinance, which relates to security deposits. It prevents the more egregious conduct of locking someone out of their apartment. It provides a number of different ways that a tenant can make repairs, can make sure that the unit is habitable, and do all the things that currently exist in the city, but would not apply in the suburbs. But as of June 1st, they will.
All right. I think it's important to reiterate something that you said at the very beginning of your remarks, which is that this was something that was under consideration and discussion and in the process of formulation for months. And it was not, it doesn't come out of the pandemic. Okay. It was something that both you and Commissioner Morrison have been working on for some time prior to the pandemic.
Correct. It became, I think, even more important because I think there are even bigger issues now that exist for our renters in suburban Cook, but it certainly was something that we spent months on. We heard from all of the different advocacy groups, including the landlords. We made significant changes, in my opinion. I'm sure Kevin agrees with me. This ordinance is better than the city's ordinance because it takes into account both sides of the ledger, and I think it will be a tremendous benefit for renters primarily, but also for landlords.
Commissioner Morrison, Commissioner Britton has shared what motivated him to be interested in the Residential Tenant Landlord Ordinance. What brought you to the table?
So similar to Commissioner Britton, we had been hearing about persistent issues of renters in suburban Cook County. What we've come to realize is there were only 3 municipalities in all of the county that had RTLO provisions in place. That was Mount Prospect, Evanston, and the city of Chicago. So for all other municipalities, those protections were not codified. And so we came to discover, especially during this pandemic, how critical these protections are desperately needed for renters. I have a friend who had his paycheck cut in half, was not able to make rent on time, and was facing very drastic late fees that made it even more difficult to ensure that they were able to get ahead. And so one of the provisions that is critical to this policy is we've actually codified a anti-lockout provision. Now, example of this would be a landlord changing the lock so that the renter no longer has access to the property, cannot access their belongings. Currently in Illinois, this is banned, but only protected through case law. Now we have a specific ordinance that renters could point to, which most importantly is going to affect our low-income renters within the county who usually could not find a way to have those protections enforced. And now, thanks to the RTLO, which, mind you, this was one of the provisions that immediately went into effect, those protections can be secured.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Let's come back to Commissioner Britton for a minute. How do you think that this new legislation will impact your constituents?
So there has been I think, a hole in our enforcement mechanism in that most people cannot afford a lawyer, but 70-some% of landlords in housing court have lawyers. This ordinance is specifically designed to enable individuals to reach out to legal aid societies or other groups. And there is an attorney's fee provision. That is the enforcement mechanism. This is not something that's going to be enforced by the county. It does not increase our budgetary obligations. It's going to be done through the courts. That's why Kevin and I are going to be giving a speech to the Chicago Bar Association next week on this particular ordinance to let everybody know, including judges, how this is going to work. But it has its own enforcement mechanism built in, and that will enable people to use the provisions of the RTLO without having to pay for it themselves. So
there, in our housing courts, landlords customarily have the advantage of counsel, as you say, and the renters, the tenants, do not. And so one of the things that this legislation will do is provide counsel for tenants.
They will be able to obtain counsel, and those counsel will be paid, which gives them an incentive to take these cases, which they have not had to date.
They might have taken the cases, but it would have been on perhaps a pro bono basis rather than something that would compensate them.
Exactly. And Madam President, as much as I love our pro bono lawyers who work in Cook County, they are stretched very thin, and there are not enough of them to help everyone who needs help. This mechanism will provide that counsel for them. And being a lawyer myself, I know how important it is to have somebody there representing you, being your advocate. This ordinance will enable that to happen.
Thank you. So let's talk to Kevin. Neither he nor I are lawyers, so let's talk about it from a non-lawyerly perspective. Why is this legislation important to you, Commissioner Morrison?
So this policy is incredibly important to me because one of the critical needs of all individuals is stable housing. I've been an advocate for stable housing, good education, being able to find a well-paying job. All these fit together. And there have been persistent issues with, the certain percentage of bad actors who do not actually fulfill their responsibilities under a landlord-tenant structure. And so what this policy will actually do is ensure that the rights and actions for renters and landlords are put in place.
Let's come back to Commissioner Britton. What haven't I asked you about this ordinance that you want to share with our viewers?
There was one point at which both Kevin and I felt like this was not going to happen because the amount of pushback that we got, particularly from landlord groups, was substantial, and they used every tool that they had to prevent this from occurring. But in the process, I think we learned very important lessons about crafting legislation. We made changes. We talked to all 17 commissioners. We got a unanimous vote, which is rare for something particularly that relates to kind of an equitable justice issue. And Madam President, I ran for this job, and I said this because it was true. I'm here to give a voice to the voiceless, to be able to represent people without lawyers and lobbyists. That's what this was about for me and for Kevin. And that's why we would not let it go. And that's why it took a little bit of time, but we got it right, and now it is in place.
Thank you. All right, I'll ask you the same, Commissioner Morrison.
Well, I would say it was a journey. From the moment we introduced this policy to finally being able to get it passed in the end of January. It was, I gotta say, the best birthday present I got. But what I learned from this experience is how important it is to get folks of differing views at the same table, talking over a constructive path forward. And I know that when it came to the advocates and the landlord and realtor groups, we all had to negotiate and find ways to move forward. Now, it wasn't easy getting bombarded with emails and, seeing, just misleading attacks on this policy, because this was never meant to be a policy that attacked all landlords. This was meant to codify the rights and obligations of landlords and tenants to ensure that those bad actors that are out there, and unfortunately they are, were not able to go unscathed. We needed to make sure that we had enforcement mechanisms in place to protect renters in all of suburban Cook County. And what is so mind-blowing is just thinking of how many households this will affect. The estimate was 245,000 suburban Cook County renters who now have protections.
That's quite an accomplishment. And I want to thank both you, Commissioner Britton, and you, Commissioner Morrison, for your hard work for more than a year. To put this legislation together and to secure unanimous passage. That's quite an accomplishment.
Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Welcome back for our second segment. Joining us are Sharon Norwood, renter leader, Marien Casillas Pabellon, who is interim executive director of PASO, and she'll tell us about that in a minute, and Jenna Prochaska, who is clinical teaching fellow in the Health Justice Project at Loyola University. All right, we're going to begin with Sharon Norwood. What's important about the Residential Tenant Landlord Ordinance from your perspective as a community activist?
Well, for me, it would have been, it's important to me because basically as a renter here in Cook County, especially suburban Cook County and where I live in Evergreen Park, there was nothing in place for me last year when I was being illegally evicted. And for 11 years, I dealt with a predatory landlord. Basically, even though I had a Section 8 voucher, I had to repair everything. I had to cut her grass on the lot that I was on and the lot that was next door. I had to pay her water bill that would reach up to $1,000, but it was because her pipes were bad. It was a multitude of things that I went through that I'm continuing to go through because of I ended up putting all of my money into a home that I eventually was taken to landlord-tenant court and the judge basically did not listen to me. She basically told me, yeah, but the landlord wants you out. I begged with her, told her that my rights were being violated. It meant nothing. And even though I had put money into the home, everything was gone and I had to leave. And to add insult to injury, they put the wrong date for me to leave the home. And the landlord showed up early, changed the locks, and I lost a multitude of things, including my son's suit for today, which was his picture day. So yeah, it would have changed. It would have been wonderful if we had this in place already. So I lost my security deposit that she was supposed to give back. I never received it. So it would have been important for me to have that.
So the new ordinance provides protections for folks like you who are in difficult situations with very problematic landlords.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Thank you. Sharon talked about her experiences as a renter with a very problematic landlord. Marien, can you share with us what this ordinance means for you and your organization?
It means a lot, and it's a helpful tool, right? There has been this gap between the rights of tenants in the city of Chicago and the suburbs. And really, we have a lot of community members that we serve. We serve the immigrant community in Paso, and we have done that for the last 10 years. And we were getting people at the door, like they didn't know what to do, right? How can I get my house fixed? How can I get repairs that are needed? And also, how can I be safe at home? Right? We have a lot of instances in which landlords were entering the premises of where people was living, and they didn't know. They have been receiving threats about social security numbers and if they have them or not. And really, what is the tool that they had to actually face these things? And the ordinance really provided space for them to bridge that gap and to start building their own confidence and take control of their own lives, in the sense that it provides them with guidance in how the relationship between them, the landlord and the tenant, should be had. And it's very important because it also gives you a sense of power that you didn't have before, right? You are in this relationship with your landlord, and he's the master of the land somehow, right? And by creating an element like this, it also gives them a sense of, I have a say, I have a voice, I'm going to use it, and I'm going to tell others. So for PASO is also a tool for how we can bring community together to share knowledge, take action directly with landlords, and be stewards of the accomplishments that we have. And one accomplishment is this. And it comes responsibility with that as well.
All right, thank you. Jenna, can you respond as an academic to this new ordinance?
Yes, thank you. As an academic, and also the Health Justice Project, which is the clinic I'm a part of, directly serves patients of Erie Family Health Centers, and also Loyola Health. We started a new medical legal partnership that serves the western suburbs. So as a lawyer serving low-income tenants, one of the issues we see come up very often is substandard housing. As both Sharon and Marien mentioned, there are a lot of problematic landlords that don't do what they need to do to keep their properties up to standards that are appropriate for tenants to be living in. And there's a lot of research connecting substandard housing and health. So we see substandard housing conditions placing tenants in very dangerous and difficult situations. And as the commissioners mentioned and has been discussed previously, there have been protections in place for decades for these tenants in some communities, including Chicago, Mount Prospect, and Evanston. So as a result, tenants in those communities have had significantly more tools and more power to negotiate with their landlords to address problematic conditions. And families in suburban communities, including communities that have been historically underrepresented and underserved by legal services and healthcare providers, have been stuck in really difficult situations. The combination of a lack of affordable housing and the lack of sufficient legal protections previously in these communities has forced a lot of tenants to make really difficult decisions between staying in homes that are impacting their health and their family's health, or making complaints and risking threats of eviction or homelessness. And this is dangerous at any time, but particularly during the pandemic, when people are spending so much time in their homes to avoid other health risks. Having tools in place that the RTLO will provide are really important to allow tenants to keep their homes in good repair, to get notice of violations, code violations by their landlord, and to have tools in place to enforce their rights, as well as protections against retaliation. So I was happy to be a part of a coalition that included advocates who are represented today and some who are not, including Housing Action Illinois and the Lawyers Committee for Better Housing, who did really great work on this ordinance, along with these tenant advocates and the commissioners who we heard from today.
Thank you. All right, Sharon, if the RTLO had been in place when you were struggling with your problematic landlord, how would it have made a difference?
Well, basically, because I am a licensed child care provider and a licensed foster parent, the state of Illinois come in and they monitor my home. And when they wrote up what needed to be repaired, and I gave it to her and she wouldn't act on it, I had to act on it. This is how I pay my bills. This is how I pay my rent. This is how I feed my family. So I did what I had to do. If that was done, I would have never been retaliated against by the landlord and taken to landlord tenant court. So if it was there at the time, it would have helped me immensely. My family would have never been uplifted, and she would have been held to account for all the repairs, the numerous amount of money that I paid to repair her home.
Thank you. Thank you. Marien?
I think what it really has given folks and things that will not be able to happen or prevent the day. There was a first vote that was postponed, right, in December. That same week, we were supporting a community member that has been illegally locked out from his apartment after living there only 4 days. He and his sister were locked out. And the first part of it is that the sister had these physical disabilities, and the landlady said, I don't want a sick person here. So I don't want you here, so get out. You have to take her out from here and put her in a hospital or whatever. And then the second part was that they couldn't get in to remove their belongings. We went to the police of North Lake that were really helpful. They were really trying to help, because guess what? This wasn't the first time that this landlady has done this. They were the fourth family in a year that have gone through that same challenges and so those same issues. So we had to go more than once to that house. We went as a group of people, and we had to have a screaming match. And that was the only way to get in the property so they can recoup their belongings. Mind you, they were not able to recover their deposit, nor even the rent. So this is really, really helpful for people in the suburban area, because it really sets specific ways to deal with these situations.
Thank you. So, Jenna, we're going to ask you to kind of sum up for us.
Thank you. I'm happy to raise a point which has come up previously and I think is worth emphasizing, is that these protections are necessary to provide basic rights to tenants throughout Cook County, some of which have been in place in other communities for decades and are necessary to allow tenants to advocate for themselves. And the next phase in the battle will be ensuring that tenants have information about these rights so that they can enforce them. Either informally with their landlords, and I know that advocacy groups are creating self-help materials that will be available, including on Illinois Legal Aid Online and rentervention.com. Tenants will be able to negotiate with the help of housing advocates like PASO and other organizations, and also seek legal assistance to enforce their rights. The ordinance provides attorney's fees, and legal aid organizations will now be able to bring cases on behalf of tenants in the suburbs and help them negotiate and advocate for safe and healthy housing and for stability in their housing, and to protect against lockouts, illegal lockouts. And those provisions, it's important to note, are in effect already. So there's a lot of great victories that the passage of this ordinance have brought into effect. There's still work to do in getting the word out, but I know advocates are already hitting the ground running on that work, and I'm just glad to be a part of it, and I really appreciate your support, President Preckwinkle, and the support of the commissioners on this important effort.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for joining us, Sharon, Marien, and Jenna. We're very grateful for your willingness to share with us on Talk with Toni. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.